Hey everybody, I'm Travis. Welcome to Concussion. In today's episode, we're talking about what it's like to live with a traumatic brain injury when no one told you what to expect. We'll get into the myths around concussion, especially in sports, like how hitting your head used to be seen as a badge of honor and why that mindset is so dangerous. We'll break down why symptoms are so different from person to person, how impulse control and emotional regulation can completely change after a brain injury, and what it's like trying to explain that to people who have never been through it. I'm Travis. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, what's up? I'm Travis.
And I'm Abby.
Welcome to Concussion.
So today we are going to first tell you what brings us here, and then we have a couple different things to cover across the board. So 9 years ago, Travis was in a motorcycle accident, suffered a traumatic brain injury at that point, and a lot of his rehab he essentially had to traverse on his own. Travis and I crossed paths briefly when he was probably a few months out from his, or a couple months out maybe from his initial accident, in an outpatient therapy clinic. At the time, he was sent for an orthopedic injury that was very minor compared to the grand scheme of injuries that he was enduring. And we happened to cross paths several years later and had a chance to really put our heads together and realize if each of us knew then what we knew now. So for me, on the clinical side, if I knew as much as I knew about concussions now back then, and if he knew about concussions, if somebody in the healthcare even industry told him about them at all, how differently things would have been for him.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about concussions whatsoever.
41 just followed.
Thank you for the follow. We appreciate it. All your support is very much appreciated. But yeah, if I wasn't informed anything about concussions, and believe it or not, there was nothing ever in school about concussions. So I had no idea really what a concussion was. I honestly thought a concussion was when your skull was cracked, and that was what constituted a concussion.
So that's a good way to put it, because that concept of what it is and what it means really isn't present in a lot of folks unless they've experienced one in the past. And we were fortunate enough to spend some time with Lonnie Quinn from CBS News. He's a meteorologist there who was willing to explain his experience with concussions in a very public way, which is incredibly brave, and it means a lot for other folks that don't have that voice to identify what they're enduring. And we left one big topic out of our reflection of this last week so that we could really spend more time explaining what it means to us. He said that up until his experience with hitting his head, getting knocked out in a game in sports was almost considered a badge of honor.
Yeah.
And the expectation was you hit your head, you're fine, you're awake, get back in there. There's no understanding or sympathy offered when someone gets hit in their head because they look fine on the outside.
Right. Yeah. Because you don't necessarily develop a huge, bump on your head. Or it's kind of all internal. Like a concussion is kind of like a traumatic brain injury.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. It's a mild traumatic brain injury.
Mild traumatic brain injury. And, they go from mild to all the way up to severe. And does it always correlate with how hard you hit your head? I mean, to a certain degree, like
to some extent, yeah. But the forces that happen inside could be deceiving. You could see, well, the head didn't really move a whole lot or didn't get hit that hard, but it depends if there was more of a rotational force, if there was more whiplash. There's a lot of factors. And since every concussion mechanism is different, every concussion is different. So you're not going to have any two individuals present the exact same because there's so many variables that go into how the head was hit, how it moved, and what the forces were like as they endured it. Yeah. So with a loss of consciousness, you're probably more than a mild TBI, but still, that was Lonnie's belief system up until that point, because that's what all of our belief systems were 10 or 15, 20 years ago. You got hit in the head in sports, even if you got knocked out, once you come to, you're fine.
You're fine. You're good.
Get back in there.
The brain scrambling wasn't really a concern.
Right.
But that's actually a huge concern now that we're understanding more about concussions and traumatic brain injuries.
And even in sports specifically, what your risk is playing on.
Because we now know that if you're concussed, you have an 11.3 times more of a chance to sustain a non-contact lower body injury.
Exactly.
Like tearing now, that is for a couple reasons, I imagine. One of those is probably that instability that many people feel after concussion because you're just wobbly. Like I remember walking through the nursing home where I was kind of getting like not brain rehabilitation, but just like walking rehabilitation. And I kept running into the wall. And I didn't really think too much of it. I was like, I think I'm okay. And the nurse is like, well, you keep running into the wall, Travis. And I'm like,
yeah.
And you know what I think I said? I was like, well, that's because my ankles hurt. And maybe that's where
that script for outpatient came in for his ankles.
But yeah, the more I think about it, like I wasn't really, my vestibular system wasn't on point. Like I kind of didn't know where I was. Like I was very wobbly.
Yeah. And you're right that just the consequences to the vestibular system could increase that risk drastically. But even when someone does have rehab to fix the outer symptoms, like being off balance, having headaches, things like that, even after that superficial layer of concussion rehab occurs and someone's cleared to go back into their sport, that risk is still present because in the study that you just referenced with the 11.3 times more likely, those were athletes in the NBA. So one of the highest levels of competition, highest levels of care. These athletes go through the whole concussion protocol. They're symptom-free when they go back into the game, so we all assume that they're safe. But it turns out concussions are much more complicated than that. It's not just once the headache goes away and you're not vomiting and you don't run into the walls that you're fine.
Right, yeah, definitely not.
The brain has tremendous responsibility. And we really have to challenge the brain to meet all the demands for what it's going to encounter in a sport before knowing, okay, you're safe to go back into that sport.
Or even just everyday life, just getting back and forth to work and being able to drive in traffic and not let your emotions get out of control. Like there's a lot of rehabilitation that needs to go into that I didn't really get. I just kind of
you had to figure it out on your own.
Yeah, and it was not easy.
No, it's not. And a lot of times you kind of succumb to the pressures of no one else understanding, you not having the words for it. It can be really a tough battle to fight on your own. So it makes this conversation a lot more in depth because you were doing it in a way that was very, you were very interested in what was going on.
Yeah.
So instead of just accepting that things were going to be different and harder, you were very introspective in terms of what else could I do about this? What else is there to learn? And that really changed the course of your recovery.
I did.
And also helps you understand why other people might not have that same outcome.
Yeah. And I noticed one of the biggest things for me was trying to express how I felt to somebody else that never experienced a concussion. Like I could say, man, like, I just don't feel right. And how does somebody take that? Like, that's very hard for somebody to comprehend. Well, what do you mean you just don't feel right? Like, I don't know what you mean by that. Like you're talking to your wife or your husband and you say, well, I just don't feel right. Like it's understandable that they don't know what the person means by that.
They have to relate it to something they know.
Right. And if they've never had a concussion.
Right. And if that I don't feel right and not having the words to say, I feel off balance, I feel like I'm spinning, I feel like I'm having a hard time concentrating. The more superficial example of that might be when they see you fall and twist your ankle and your ankle's swollen and it hurts and you're explaining that to somebody, even without them seeing it, they've had an experience similar enough to be able to start to relate and identify the things that you're explaining.
Right.
But it's so hard when you don't have the words to match the symptoms. And then when you look fine, it's even harder to really get your point across and communicate what's going on.
Right. Because even if you know what your vestibular system is and you tell your significant other, hey, my vestibular system's off, they're just going to be like,
What do you want me to do about that?
Yeah, what is that? What?
Right. Why can't you take out the trash?
Yeah, like it's very hard to understand, but
Yeah.
so that's another thing we're trying to do here is help people put words to all that that complexity.
And the badge of honor comment that Lonnie made me think about something that happened recently in terms of our belief system around what happens when someone hits their head. And of course, sports is the easiest thing to pull into it because it's the most televised. We have the most access to that content. And there was a situation recently in the playoffs in the NBA where Jason Tatum endured an Achilles tear. And there was a lot of empathy and understanding as to what that meant. However, we're going to pull up a clip of what happened a couple weeks prior. And we'll let that clip play first, and then we're going to discuss what this means on our end of things.
Boom.
Okay, so for everyone that's just listening, I'm going to explain what's happening here. So Jason Tatum was running full speed, went to go get the ball into the basket. I think he was even attempting a dunk there. And there was a collision underneath the basket, and he went full speed into the base of the basketball hoop where the padding is there. But what you see here is this is a collision probably at, I'd guess, somewhere between 16 and 18 miles per hour that he was moving when he hit. So like a low speed impact if it were a car accident. But it's just him. He's not surrounded by a car. And you can tell that he is visibly in pain. So when he hits, there's a physical reaction. He's wincing quite a bit, kind of stomping his feet a little bit because he's in so much pain. And he hit his head on the floor of the basketball court. However, his coach is shown in this clip. And his coach reaches out to stop the athletic trainer from going out onto the court. So he puts his hand out and he tells him, don't go out there. And then the coach yells out to Jason, get up. So that's really reflective of how we perceive head impacts, this time specifically in sports. His coach saw, you're still moving, you're still conscious, get up. Now, fast forward a couple weeks, and again, we can't know for certain if these two things were related. We just know the likelihood between head impacts and then lower body injuries that come along afterwards. A couple weeks later, he's playing, and then we have that clip up here as well. So we'll let that one show what happened next. And this is something probably everyone watching knows happened.
Oh, there's Jason Tatum with the pink shoes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't watch a lot of sports. I'm sorry. I don't know.
But you, even from not watching sports, you have no idea who's playing right now in the NBA playoffs. You can still understand the magnitude of what just happened.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%.
So he tears his Achilles. There's immediate response from the medical staff. There's immediate response from the coaching staff. And then the thousands of fans that are there, it goes from a very loud, vibrant environment where everyone is screaming to just a slow dampen to everyone's yelling, cheering, because they realize that this player on the ground is probably not getting up anytime soon on his own volition.
Nobody was there for when he hit his head, though.
Exactly. Because as the way we understand injuries, there's a very significant gap between how we can identify with someone who's hit their head versus how we can identify with someone who tore their Achilles.
Everybody knows what it's like to roll an ankle, but not as many people know what it's like to slam your head off the concrete.
Exactly. So we can imagine the magnitude of pain that he's enduring with that tear. We can imagine the magnitude of emotional response of now he's out of the playoffs. This is something very important that he's worked for his whole life. So our level of empathy is drastically different when we see somebody injure their body versus somebody injure their head.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, the brain may be a little bit more important than your ankle.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, it's
Your brain controls your ankle.
your brain controls your ankle,
Yeah.
and your breathing and all kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm. So this was a great representation of how Lonnie explained that our overall perception, obviously this is not everybody, of head impacts versus other injuries that people can see are drastically different.
Yeah,
And it really kind of puts the pressure on us to make sure that we're relaying that message in, number one, a responsible way, but number two, in a relatable way, so that way we have more advocates than we have people that are on the side of things, such as the coach, where
yeah,
it's get up, move on, kind of nobody cares.
right. Yeah,
But that's the impression I got.
oh yeah, yeah. Like get up, like let's get up.
Yeah, he yelled at him from the sideline to get
Yeah.
up, but he's not laying there wincing for fun.
Right,
It's no advantage to the game. It's not running the clock out or anything like that.
and
He was in
and
pain.
I would imagine people like Jason Tatum. Is that his name?
Yep. You got
Okay,
it.
I'm getting good.
Mm-hmm.
Like he probably has a type A personality. Like I'm not the person to just like lay around just because I want to lay around. You know, I want to win. I want to get out there. I want to rock and roll. And you know, there's a lot of people like that get concussions and just kind of get that knocked out of them, and they just can't. But they've gone their whole life with this like type A personality that is just ready to hammer at anything that life throws at them. But
And usually it's the athlete that will push themselves, not the people around them.
right,
So this is kind of a unique scenario where it's the coach demanding that the player get up and go on. But more so we see that the athletes, if they do sustain some sort of whiplash or head impact, they can't self-inventory right away because they're in such a high stakes environment. If it's a game like that, or even any game, they really are in performance mode. They block out everything else that doesn't matter and just focus on their team, the execution, like winning.
yeah,
They're not thinking about all the other components of, am I seeing clearly? Are my eyes moving as fast as they were before?
yeah,
Does my head hurt?
yeah,
They're not in that headspace at the time.
yeah,
So usually we're encouraging athletes to be a little bit more in tune with what's going on after a head impact. But in this one, Jason was definitely in tune with what was happening with his head. It's just the pressure from everyone around him because they didn't understand what he was going through.
yeah. And it's like our chat here on Bam Dog. He says, you know, head injuries are like taboo. You know, it's kind of like, yeah, we don't really want to talk about those things.
Why do you think that is?
Why do you think they're taboo? Why do you
Yeah.
think people don't want to talk about them? They don't understand them.
I think that's a big part of it. I think it's because we don't really understand what it means because brains are so complicated.
They are very complicated.
And like I said, everyone's different. So even if you happen to know somebody who's had a concussion or an injury to their brain, you're never going to see that exact same presentation again. So it's so foreign in a way. You don't know
Yeah.
how to relate to that
right.
or how to sympathize with it or what things to say, what things to ask, what's not okay to ask.
Yeah. I'll tell you, like, so I went through Reddit today and I was reading a lot on the RTBI and R concussion, and there was a lot of valid points and valid questions. And honestly, I could have just read all day because there's so many real world scenarios and so many people on there saying the exact same thing that I've said, that I've heard Lonnie say, that I've heard other people say, that I've been talking to recently. And there was lots of resources that they also posted that I went and read, and there's some great advice, maybe not advice, but great just information that I was able to read today.
I will give you one caution about that out of a specific example. So I guess it's been about 6 or 7 years ago by now. There was an NFL player who joined this medical startup, and they were advertising something called, I think it was called Prevacus. It was a nasal spray that had a type of steroid that could cross the blood-brain barrier very quickly, and it was meant to cure concussions. I'm using air quotes here. So when you are in that situation where you're trying to find more information, you're trying to advocate for yourself, you could have come across this. And at the time, if you had come across this, you would have tried it, right? Something that would cure what's going on. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, that's very probable. Like,
But
especially when you're desperate for hope.
exactly. So the trouble is being able to weed through some of these things that are posted online and understanding how much due process it takes to figure out if something actually is going to help you, if it's the right information, if it's beneficial. And as you could guess, Prevacus is not something you should be using. It, never achieved any sort of FDA clearance, but that's the kind of challenge that you face with enduring something that's so unfamiliar.
Because you want to be cured. And that's almost like a confirmation bias. You believe that there's a cure out there for something as complex as a brain injury, and you see it, and your brain wants to believe that because it does have this overwhelming proclivity to try to find out or try to prove what it thinks. And if it sees something that says, oh yeah, 9 out of 10 doctors recommend this brain juice.
Yeah. You're going to go in both feet.
Yeah,
right?
a lot of people are going to go in like,
Exactly.
let's do it. And then who knows what could happen with that? Like,
Yeah.
that could be.
So that's the other challenge that you face. So I'm glad that you brought up, like, you've been able to find other people identifying things, providing resources. It takes such a thorough filter to be able to find resources that are actually going to be helpful for you versus somebody came across a supplement or a medication or a controversial intervention. It makes it even more challenging to face something that nobody has any valuable, readily available guidance to start. And then now you have this responsibility of being a detective over everything else that you come across.
And like you said, everybody's brain is different, and you've been through different emotional states throughout your entire life. So everybody's brain has formed a little bit differently. So how can this one thing be the cure for your particular brain injury? Because everybody's brain, like you said, if you've seen one concussion, you've seen one concussion. So these things are immensely complicated. I mean, you have billions of neurons in your brain with 10,000 dendrite connections at the end of each one. And every single one of those is responsible for the emotional states that you feel,
and that's
very
probably
complicated.
Why I get frustrated with the request for a protocol. So in concussion management, that comes up a lot, especially on the research side of things, or even consulting with different teams. They understand protocols. They want protocols. So for instance, if you twist your ankle, it's determined to be a grade 3 sprain, there's a protocol. If you have a meniscectomy or you have a hip or labral repair, there's a protocol. Everything is so dialed in to have an exact science of this is what you do when. However, with concussions, we can give you general guidelines, but a protocol, if someone gives you a protocol for a concussion,
Don't take that.
how in the heck do they know what that protocol is going to be addressing with your unique injury?
Right. Because like everybody's ankle works the same.
Yep.
But brains are like fingerprints.
Yeah. Did you just come up with that?
I did. Just now.
Wow. It's profound. It is. Yeah. That's a great way to put it. And each part of that fingerprint is going to have connections a little bit differently. It's going to express itself differently. And the mechanism of how you injure that fingerprint is going to come across very differently.
Yeah.
So the word protocol and concussion, in my opinion, don't go together. But I do understand that there has to be that language for certain aspects of the healthcare industry, sports medicine, things like that. But maybe now people understand why I have such a visceral reaction sometimes as to the protocol side of things when we're proposing different aspects of how to prevent and treat concussions.
So I took a lot of psychology in high school, and I have sitting right over there the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. And if you look at them, there are a lot of overlapping similarities in
the symptoms,
in the symptoms and diseases, and what you have to have, what you need to show, what symptoms you need to show to be able to say, okay, this is what you have. And it's kind of just like clinical guidelines that say, well, maybe this is like doctors and psychologists and physical therapists. It's a complicated business.
Yeah, because you're dealing with humans.
Yeah, and you might get a human like me.
And they all have different fingerprint brains.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everybody.
It is very
yeah.
challenging. You
Yeah.
have to be able to, especially when it comes, because you're right. The ankle has a very similar structure across the board. Of course, there might be minor nuances. Knees, shoulders, all the same idea, same structural support, same bones, ligaments, tendons, all that. But when it comes to a brain, not one is the same. They have the same lobes, the same functional areas of it, but that connectivity is never going to be the same from person to person in terms of what would happen after that connection gets disrupted.
So one of our viewers here says, in my case, doctors were trying to rush me back. Went to a concussion clinic, took my first impact test 3 months after my accident, and was in the 5th percentile.
So do you know what an impact test is?
I don't.
So it's a computer-based test that all athletes are required to take before they play sports. So did your daughter play anything in high school?
She played lacrosse for a little while, and she was a cheerleader.
Okay, so before she played lacrosse, before she participated in cheerleading, her athletic trainer had her come into a room for cheerleading. It probably was before school started. Sit at a computer and take this test. This test will measure visual reaction time. It'll measure visual spatial awareness, immediate recall, some working memory things, and impulse control.
Impulse control.
Yep. So it gets a baseline test, and the idea is that if your daughter were to have had a head impact that was suspected to be a concussion in lacrosse or in cheerleading, she would have to retake that test.
Okay.
And then that way you have a comparison.
So you can say, okay, well, this was. So what about people who get concussions, like Bam Dog 41, and he's never taken one of those tests before, and he goes to take it the first time?
Yeah. How do you know that that's not his baseline?
Where's the baseline?
Exactly. And now the impact tests are still used, but they're not relied upon the way they used to be, because once we finally had an assessment that started to capture more than just, well, you're not falling over, you're not throwing up, and your eyes are open, then it became kind of universal. Let's give everybody this test. But then they started to learn that, well, there is a learning effect to it. The more times you take it, the better you'll get. And also, if we don't have a baseline, how much value does that hold?
Right. Because like you were saying the other day, the one athlete that you tested, her original antipsychotics were good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something. Am I remembering right?
I think I know what you're after. So the one athlete had a head impact. I only got to test her afterwards, but that's kind of why I rely a little bit more on eye movement, just because even without a baseline, we can still get an idea about connectivity. Her specific head impact did not influence her antipsychotics, so she did not have any compromise to her impulse control.
So that just shows you how
different everything is, because that measure of antipsychotics is the most closely correlated with concussion history, meaning that symptom, so to speak, will have the strongest tie to whether someone sustained a concussion. But in her case, she definitely sustained a concussion, but had perfect antipsychotics.
And an antipsychotic is, in case you're not a medical professional and know what an antipsychotic is, because I didn't know for sure. There's like, say, a bright dot, and then there's nothing over here, bright dot here, nothing over here, and you're supposed to look at the nothing over here versus the bright dot. And like, as a photographer, I do know that your eyes want to automatically focus on the brightest spot in a picture. So what the antipsychotic test does is essentially how much can you avoid that? How much control over your eyes, since your eyes automatically want to go to the brightest spot in the room, how much control do you have to go equal and opposite away from that bright spot?
Yeah, you use the word equal and opposite. That's great. So the way the testing side of that works is it starts off with a dot in the center of the screen, and then the dot will either move right or left. So only one dot is visible, and when it moves, reflexively, your eyes want to follow it because you see nothing else on the screen. There's a dot in the center. If the dot moves right, you want to look right. if you were to follow it, that's considered a prosaccade. So that's just following the reflex there. But we can get measures of executive function and concentration out of that because it's a little bit longer of a test. But an antisaccade is when I tell you that I want you to look equal and opposite away from where that dot moves. So you're looking at the dot when it's in the middle. If the dot moves right, your job is to look equal and opposite left, but there's nothing there.
Yeah, that was a hard one.
It is very hard. And again, it's a longer test because we want to make sure we're still looking at a quality assessment of that. You know, if you just test 2 or 3, we're not getting anywhere. So we test it for about 45 to 60 seconds to be able to get a good assessment of that.
Now, so say athlete is running down the court, trips over whatever. She's running, let's say she's running 5 miles an hour, trips over a basketball, falls down, hits her head right here, and her antisaccades are still perfect. Travis is running down the court 5 miles an hour, trips over a basketball. I hit my head right here, same exact spot, same exact scenario. Everything's the same, but my antisaccades are terrible because my brain was damaged.
Your brain accelerated in a different way. Your brain had a different propensity for more connections in that certain area of the brain that is responsible for controlling that.
Yeah. So,
and impulse control is a big topic that you've brought up too. And that's the only way that I know of to get an objective measure behind that.
Impulse control.
Mm-hmm. Through antisaccades.
Antisaccades.
So like if in sports, like an example of impulse control is, we'll use basketball since we talked about Jason Tatum today. So say for instance, he's coming down the court with the ball and a defender is coming towards him. He has to decide, is he going to go around the defender to the right, to the left? Is he going to pass to his teammate? Or is he going to keep the ball and keep driving at the defender? So he has a lot of decisions to make. The impulse control comes in when he has to make a decision and to go or no go, so either stay the course or change course, based on that instantaneous presentation of that defender movement. So as the defender gets closer, let's say the defender shifts his body to block the right side of Jason Tatum, he needs to decide, am I going to go left, am I going to go straight, or am I going to pass that ball? So all of that is information that's presented and a fast decision as to what you're going to do based on that visual information.
Gotcha. And sometimes people try to fake you out.
Yeah.
So they, but they actually throw the ball the other way.
Yeah. So there's a lot of fast decisions that have to be made. And that go, no go response is the best way to explain impulse control. But if you don't play basketball, how do you experience it?
Driving.
Okay. How so with driving?
So say you're driving down the road and you're coming down the road 45 miles an hour and you're 2-lane traffic and you see a guy that's driving, maybe 45, 46, right along with you. And you kind of watching out of the corner of his eye and he goes to get over, or maybe he doesn't see you, something like that. Or he hits his turn signal and doesn't turn. And at the same time, there's a red light that just popped up, and there's a little kid over here playing on the side of the road that shouldn't be on the side of the road.
So you have to make a go, no go decision. Am I going to slam on my brakes, let him go? Am I going to speed up to get out of his way?
Right.
All those. Okay. That's a really good example. What about in terms of somebody asks you something, and it would be normally something you'd keep to yourself? Or a response or a comment. Say they say something that kind of strikes a chord with you and otherwise would consider a different response, but in an instant might say something a little bit more impulsive.
Oh, yeah. So I've sent a couple emails like that, and where I wanted to be very boisterous about something, and I write out this long email and just put all my feelings into it and write out everything I'm feeling and then hit send. And I was like, yeah. And I'm like, you think I should have sent that or should I probably have just saved that to my drafts? And then also too, like, yeah, for sure. Like sometimes like I probably should have just held my tongue, but I wanted people to know exactly how I felt inside, and I had zero impulse control to stop it. Like, and I wasn't like super rude or yell at somebody, but I was like, hey, dude, this is what you're doing wrong. This is why I don't like it, and I probably could have maybe adjusted my
Could have used some
view.
filters.
Could have used some filters,
Yeah.
but there's the filter is gone.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, I still find that happening.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and then sometimes, like, the longer the day goes by, like, the more tired I am, the more stress I go through that day, the thinner, the thinner my filters get.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, like,
Things will come
especially
through.
when I'm driving home and I've already had a long day, I've been up since 4 o'clock in the morning, you know, now it's 5 o'clock at night, and I've been up all day, and you start to like, I mean, I don't like to feel like I'm wearing down, you know?
Yeah.
I still feel like I'm, you know?
But you might notice it through some of your responses. And like fatigue is going to bring out a little bit more of that kind of hasty reply.
Irritability.
So like, yeah. So like, I'm sure that explaining it in that way is helpful for people to understand what it is that you mean by that. So the best way to explain it is when you reach that level of tired and irritability after you've been awake, 14 or 16 hours, it starts to come through a little bit. You're oftentimes after your concussion, you're experiencing that sometimes after just 2 hours.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like the fatigue level is so intense because your brain is working so hard with all of this rewiring, rerouting, trying to make connections in ways that used to be just automatic that now are very thoughtful. So that irritability level and that impulse control become compromised along with it.
Yeah. And yeah, and he asked if my work knows about my TBI. Yes, it does. Yep. I was actually off for about a year. I was initially off for about 5 months, 6 months, and I went back, because I felt it. I felt like I needed to continue my climb up the ladder, and I really wanted to get back. And I was like, I was feeling okay. I mean, I was like Lonnie saying, I could breathe, and I was feeling fine, and I was walking around my neighborhood, and my balance was okay, but I still knew I was just off. I just wasn't there, but I just pushed myself because, I'm the provider for my family, and I had to like get my income back. And I wanted to even climb further up the scale. So I went back probably too early, and I noticed that about a month in, it was just too much. And like you said, like those 2 hours I was done with everybody.
Yeah.
Like I didn't want to hear a word. I didn't want to hear any sound. I didn't want to focus on 10,000 things going on at once. It was just like that would just focusing, just like looking at stuff, just looking at everything that was there and everything that was happening was like running a marathon. It was, and then like all the noise that was going on, that was like one of the hardest things for me. Just noise. It was too busy of an environment for my brain. I had to get out. So I contacted my human resources department and my doctor, and they were good with it. They said, "Hey man, yeah, we understand. You were," and luckily my company was like that. There's a lot of people that
don't have that support.
Support.
Yeah. But you kind of had to slowly push through that barrier over the course of years to kind of get to the point where you can make it through a work day without that filter wearing too thin, to the point where it was going to create problems for you. But now we're fast forwarding to where we are now, and we're trying to do things about it.
Yeah, trying to get better. And he says that my story is just like his. Like, yeah, brother, like I feel you, man. There's a lot of people, and they have that same story, man. And there's a lot of people that they don't know what to say. Like I didn't know what to say. You probably didn't know what to say. And that's why we're doing this. Like, that's like, I'm kind of like tech savvy a little bit, and I like to
You're a little tech savvy?
a little bit.
You built an entire studio.
I,
My little tech savvy is I just learned how to screen record probably 8 months ago. So I think you're major tech savvy.
I'm okay.
He produces all of this.
It's okay.
I show up and talk.
It's okay. It's not that big a deal. But I have a passion for it because I really want people to hear this, and like, because, man, if I heard this stuff, like, I wish I could have heard this stuff. Like, I thought I was the only person that this has ever happened to, and nobody else in the whole world would understand this at all. But that's not true. Like, there are people that do understand. They're just not, I mean, they may not be right in your life right there, right beside you, but there are people out there. And I just want people to know that, like,
Yeah.
and to get, and know that there are resources that will help you get better, like, will help you function, will at least give you something to think about.
Yeah. And that's so important because you've heard from like kind of a more global view how now that you're doing this and people at work hear it or friends hear it, they're all echoing that same thing to you of something wasn't right. I just didn't know what.
I just couldn't put my finger on it.
Right.
Man. And that is
so
like,
that theme is recurring. And now it just gives a little bit more momentum as to why this message has to be a little bit more public about what it means when you have a concussion and what's to be done about it.
Yeah.
But you're now on the much more structured side of what to do about it. And so Travis and I are meeting up every once in a while to go through some interventions, so to speak, things that would help address things that are challenging for him in terms of driving, impulse control, things that are still problematic this far out because they never had a chance to be treated.
Right.
And we know the brain is an incredibly capable system that can rewire, learn new things, build more efficiencies, become more automated in certain ways. So we'll talk briefly just about one or two things that we did, but we'll get into the rest of it next time because something else that you experienced in that intervention side of things was surprising to you as to how difficult it was. And I think that when we talk about it next time, you'll realize that other people are going to be echoing that the same way that you're saying, like, I knew something was right, but I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
The part that you found challenging, I can guarantee you're going to find a lot of other folks echoing that same challenge. But we'll start with the things that we did earlier on, kind of as like a primer, getting your brain warmed up, so to speak. I gave you a task that I had you do one time before so you were familiar with it. So I really like the idea of visual mapping with any sort of intervention. And what I mean by that is I want you to be focused on where information is, being able to have good immediate recall, and then a working memory based on location of that information.
Yeah.
So I laid out two separate charts, so to speak. Would you call them charts?
Cards.
Yeah, two sets of cards.
Like memory cards, like the game memory.
Kind of like the game memory, except you don't get to expose two things at a time. You only can expose one thing at a time. So we have two sets of cards, and they're all face down. And his job is to match fruits and vegetables that start with the same letter.
Pear and potato.
Yeah, squash and strawberry.
Yeah.
Things like that. So he had to choose any one card on one side, and then if it was a fruit, he had to do one task, and if it was a vegetable, he had to do another task. So on this instance, the task was just doing a single leg tap onto a disc. So I gave him a red disc and a green disc. And when he first did this, his job was if he drew a fruit, he would go over to where the red disc was, tap the red disc with one foot, and then turn his head the opposite way with a head-mounted laser to a target on the wall. So we have multiple layers to this. So he's trying to remember what it is that he drew and where it is. Based on that information, he's going to do something associated with it. So he's going to go to the red target, tap there, and simultaneously turn his head away, which we discussed in previous episodes. It's not that easy.
So I'll tell you how hard it is. Like the first four times I did it, I forgot I was supposed to be even matching them up. All I did was like, okay, fruit, red,
Turn head away.
Yes, like that. And then you said, I can't remember what you did, but you referenced the other side. And I was like, oh, that's right. I'm supposed to be matching them up. I forgot all about that.
Yeah.
So I forgot the whole rules to the game. I think that's kind of what a concussion can do, even 9 years out. It's just that little simple task when you get focused on doing something else, all that other attention, you just go away. But like it's like when you walk into a room to get the remote control or to get your jug of ice or whatever it is. And you walk in there, but you see your cat comes up and you pet your cat because your cat's cute. And then you're like, why did I not come in here? Well, a cat just blew my attention all over, like gone. So now, why did I even come in here?
You're exactly right. So that's why I always make the most complicated task kind of the last layer. Well, I don't always do that, but in this instance I did because it took your full attention to turn your head opposite of where you were tapping and hit a target on the wall that was very small.
Yeah, right. So that a laser beam on my head.
So you had to use all of your attention to perform this very complicated task that all the other stuff kind of fell by the wayside at first, but that's what's supposed to happen. Like it's meant to be something that is forcing you to think in a different way, forcing you to strategize, start to develop tricks for how you're going to improve your immediate recall and your working memory, how you're going to organize all this. Because if we're trying to make the brain more efficient, we have to increase the demand so that it starts to build that efficiency.
Like exercise for the brain.
It's exercise for the brain.
So you have to start exercising it like very lightly, incrementally.
Incrementally, yes.
So it's like, because you don't just jump into the gym and start bench pressing 225. You have to warm up. Like you want to start with like the bar maybe.
Right. And in that same example, this wasn't your first time doing that visual mapping task. We did it one time before, but I gave you just a physical task. You just had to do sit to stands or step ups.
Yes.
So you still did something associated on what you expose yourself to. But I wanted you, and I said to you, I just want you to learn this system. Right?
Gotcha.
And you liked it. You're like, I feel good. I'm moving. Like, yeah, it's important that you move. We need your heart rate to get up in order for your brain to have the best experience here. But if this were your first time doing it, I probably wouldn't give you all those layers.
That was a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So we wanted to have some exposure, like have some success, make sure it was something you could do very well. And you kicked butt in it the first time.
Well, thank you.
You did it very quickly.
I'm a very competitive person.
The last layer to this one is I told you need to complete this in less than 6 minutes.
Yes. Oh yeah, that gave me a goal. But I didn't really have it. Like,
made you rush too.
Made me rush.
Feel pressure.
It did make me rush.
We have to make you feel pressured.
I did feel pressure.
Yeah.
I did for sure. And I was like, oh man, I gotta do this. And then I didn't think I did. I didn't think I made it.
You didn't think you made it. But what did you complete it in? Do you remember?
5 minutes
and 35 seconds.
And I thought it was 23.
Oh,
I guess so.
Maybe I'll go check. I know that you came in under the 6 minutes. It was an excellent experience for you. You did every component of it. It was challenging. If you could do it all without any redirection prompts or anything from me, it might have been too easy.
Yeah, and I hate things that are too easy.
Yeah, and it's like, what are we doing to the brain if it's too easy? It's got to be challenging.
I love my life to be as complicated as possible. It seems to be. So I like doing those, like little bit. I like this to have a challenge and then, meet it. Like that's great.
Yeah.
Even if it's a little challenge,
Yeah, but still, you rose to the occasion. Were able to rise to the occasion and also challenge your brain in a way that allows us to build better connections, streamlines. In other words, if I were to have you do it again, which I did, we could make it more complicated. And we did, and you did great. So there's a system in place of like, how do we continue to challenge us? How do we make this more complicated? How do we make his brain work harder to be able to recruit all the areas that he needs in order to do this task.
Yeah.
But you did really well with it.
Well, thank you.
So go ahead.
I did tell Abby that my main goal is to be like one of those people on Instagram, the calisthenic people that like do one-handed push-ups on a Bosa ball. I'm a little bit far from that. I'm a little bit away. But
I'm sure if you came up with an incremental approach, you'd be able to do it.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, like our viewer says, he hates not being challenged.
Yeah.
But being overly challenged is like,
ooh, good point. That's a delicate balance.
yeah, it's a delicate balance.
Yes, that is something that you definitely have to be aware of when you're treating concussions.
So how do you become aware of that? Like, because a lot of times I know that I will overdo it, and then I'm just like flat out done. And
ooh, how do I explain that? This is not a valuable answer, but it is the answer. It just takes a lot of experience. So as you start going along, you're going to find this like middle road where you're challenging everything. You're challenging emotional regulation. You're challenging capacity to think, remember, multitask, exert. And then you're also going to find this point where you start to realize you're tipping to a point where the system is starting to break down, where you're now eliciting symptoms in a way that's counterproductive.
yeah.
So how do you know that? How do you know when you're challenging but not overly challenging?
Like, yeah. How do you know that? Because it'll get to the point where I just will get so mad at something and blow up and and I'll yell, and I know I'm past the tipping point. Like I've done it again. I've pushed myself past the limit.
I'll have to think about that. See if I can come up with something that's a more general way to describe it, because it's not one thing. It's not just when there's tears. It's not just when there's a physical response, like when they're turning red, or it's not that, because sometimes tears are okay and we can work through them. And sometimes when frustration is at that point, we want to insist that we work through it. Because sometimes that's where the best strategies kind of come out of this in terms of being automated. It really is a matter of just enough exposure to know where that point is. But I'll think about that and see if I can come up with a better answer for what you're looking for. Like something of how do you know when it's too much?
Right.
Because in terms of the challenges.
Because just like our viewer says, like when it becomes beyond exhausting and you blow up, then it's like you're the bad person. Like you are the one that did something wrong, and it's kind of just like a natural thing that happened, and you're trying to do the best you can and trying to do what you were able to do before, but it just becomes so frustrating for you that it gets you agitated, and because you become agitated, then you're a bad person, and you're not a bad person. You're just trying to do the best you can do.
Yeah.
And it's just a little bit more difficult, but it's hard to explain what is difficult about it, because you used to do it so easily, or, that's a challenge. And I love just talking about that stuff with people that have experienced it and lived it, because it's, I mean, I can relate there, man. Like I know my emotions, like that was the hardest thing to try to get under control, and they're still not like all under control. I still get like super sad or depressed or angry about stuff. And I know like everything is like great in my life. Like, man, I have a great wife and awesome podcast partner, and I'm kind of tech savvy and have a cool job, and like it's great, but you still get sad about stuff. You still get like upset, and you don't know why.
Yeah.
You're just like, life is good. Life is good, but man, you're just like upset. I don't know how to explain that. Like you have everything you can see is clearly great, but it just you just don't feel good.
So we're going to have a doctor that I really trust in that concussion management space come on and speak with us sometime over the next month or two about that part exactly.
That's great.
Because I think that would be very helpful to have his expert insight as to why that emotional regulation is such a hard barrier at first. But where does it come from? What do you do about it? That whole side of things. We'll let him kind of give us his insight from his experience, because he's had quite a bit of experience in treating concussions and seeing how it affects people.
And I cannot wait to hear that. Like, yeah,
I'm really excited for that one. And in fact, next week we will have another guest on with us as well. Her story is very compelling, and I'm really glad that she's wanting to share it, so that way we can all learn from what she went through, and just become better concussion advocates.
Yeah, definitely want to hear that. I've reached out to a couple of my friends that are in the military. I've never been in the military, but I have several friends who have been in the military due to my job. And, I reached out to them to kind of ask what, if they know anybody who have had like blast concussions and they deal with this type of stuff. Because I've been working with these guys for like almost 25 years. So I know that that's definitely the case. I just got to get a hold of the right people, and we can have them on. And I'm pretty excited about this. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you all next week.
Yeah, thank you so much. Very appreciated. If you see this on YouTube, just like drop a comment, a like, pass it to somebody, send it to somebody. But somebody that you think would need it, somebody that it would help. Don't just send it to random people, because as you probably know, most random people don't have time to listen to concussions, or listen about concussions because they don't understand them. So if you know somebody that needs it, please get it out there. So, all right, I'm Travis.
And I'm Abby. We'll see you guys next time.
See ya. So today we covered a lot, from the confusion and isolation that comes with the TBI to the way athletes are often pushed to shake it off and get back in the game. We talked about how impulse control, fatigue, and even simple memory tasks can become frustrating challenges. Things that most people never see from the outside. And we shared a glimpse into the kind of cognitive rehab I'm doing now, years later, to try to rewrite what was lost. Next week, we're bringing on a guest with a powerful story of her own recovery, and I can't wait to you all hear it. Thanks for being here. I'm Travis. See you next time.